On Labor Day, surrounded by my own family, my son-in-law looked me in the eye and called me the maid. Then he announced I was no longer welcome in my own home. My daughter said nothing. Even my grandchildren went silent. I didn't fight back. Not that night. But when he tried to sell the company my husband and I built, I made sure he was the one thrown out. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The Labor Day sun streamed through the tall windows of Eleanor Whitmore's colonial home, illuminating the long dining table she had dressed in crisp linen and polished silver. The house, though too quiet since Richard's passing, still carried his presence in every detail. The shelves of well-worn books, the polished mahogany furniture, the garden just beyond the glass doors where they had planted roses together decades earlier. Today, Eleanor wanted everything to feel alive again. She had risen before dawn, steadying her hands with purpose as she prepared the dishes Richard had always loved. Her famous pot roast, slow-braised until tender, buttery mashed potatoes whipped with cream, and the apple pie that never survived more than a few minutes at family gatherings. It was supposed to be a day of warmth, a fragile attempt at normalcy. Instead, it became the stage for her humiliation. Daniel Prescott leaned back in his chair, barely glancing at the food before remarking, "The potatoes are lumpy this time, Eleanor." His voice was calm, yet laced with disdain, each word chosen to wound. Caroline, Eleanor's daughter, shifted uncomfortably at his side. "I think they're delicious, Mom," she offered softly, her eyes darting between her husband and her mother. She had been walking this tightrope for years, torn between defending the woman who raised her and appeasing the man she had married. Eleanor simply smiled, though her chest ached with the effort, and continued serving. Across the table, her grandchildren, Sophie and Lucas, barely noticed the tension. Their faces glowed blue from the light of their phones, their laughter muffled, oblivious to the sharp words cutting across the table. Only Margaret Holloway, Richard's secretary of 30 years and Eleanor's dearest friend, met her eyes. There was sympathy in Margaret's glance, the kind that said, "Hold on, don't let him see you falter." "Did you remember to call the realtor?" Daniel asked suddenly, his fork poised in the air. Eleanor's hand froze around the gravy boat. "What realtor?" Daniel dabbed his mouth with a napkin, his linen shirt crisp, freshly pressed that very morning by Eleanor herself. "We've been meaning to discuss this. This house is too large for one person. It's impractical." "This is my home," Eleanor said, her voice steadier than her heart. Every wall held a memory, the kitchen doorway marked with Caroline's childhood height, the den where she and Richard had stayed up late, sketching business plans, the garden where laughter once echoed. This wasn't just a house, it was her life, woven into bricks and timber. "The property taxes are a burden," Daniel continued coolly. "The company can't sustain such unnecessary expenses." Eleanor straightened. "I pay the taxes from my personal account. The company does not cover this." Caroline's lips parted. "Mom, Daniel thinks it might be better if you moved into Sunset Gardens, just for comfort." The words stung sharper than Daniel's mockery. Sunset Gardens was where the forgotten went. "I am 63, not 90, Eleanor said, her cheeks burning. "I don't need assisted living." Daniel chuckled, the sound grating. "It's not assisted living, it's independent living, perfect for someone in your position." "And what position is that?" He leaned back in Richard's chair, her husband's chair, and gestured around the room. "Let's be honest. You've been playing housekeeper since Richard died. Cooking, cleaning, ironing my shirts. It's all you know how to do." The table fell silent. Even the children looked up, startled. Caroline gasped, "Daniel!" But he wasn't finished. "This house will be sold. The company needs the capital. And you, Eleanor, need a reality check. You were the pretty wife who threw dinner parties. Richard was the genius. Now that he's gone, it's time to face facts. You should be packed by the end of the month." Beneath the table, Margaret reached for Eleanor's trembling hand. "Don't let him win," her eyes pleaded. Eleanor's breath caught, but she steadied it, feeling the weight of the key that rested on a chain beneath her blouse, the key to Richard's private safe. Inside it was the one document Daniel had no idea existed. "That's interesting timing," she said evenly, pushing back from the table. "Tomorrow morning I plan to visit the company offices. It's been too long." Daniel's smug expression faltered. "What for?" She allowed herself the smallest of smiles, the one Richard once called her chess player smile. To deliver paperwork, documents Richard left regarding ownership of the company. The color drained from Daniel's face. What are you talking about? You'll find out tomorrow, she replied, gathering the plates with deliberate calm. For now, since I'm apparently the family's maid, I should clear the table. Margaret rose to follow her into the kitchen, the scrape of her chair loud in the silence. Daniel's voice carried after them, sharp and desperate. She's bluffing. She has nothing. But Eleanor's hands, though trembling as she set the dishes in the sink, knew better. She had everything she needed to turn the tide. Richard had made sure of it. And Daniel Prescott was about to learn that underestimating Eleanor Whitmore was his greatest mistake. Night settled heavy over the Whitmore house, cloaking its corners in silence. Eleanor lingered in Richard's study, the room untouched since his passing 3 years ago. His leather chair still bore the faint indentation of his frame. His glasses rested exactly where he had left them, balanced on the mahogany desk they had chosen together. Even now, she could almost hear his voice, calm and steady, offering her the wisdom that had carried them through every storm. You'll need to be patient, Eleanor, he had told her in those final weeks, when his voice was weak but his mind remained sharp. Let Daniel believe he has the upper hand. Let them all underestimate you. That will always be your greatest advantage. Her fingers moved instinctively to the chain around her neck. The small brass key warmed in her palm as if carrying Richard's strength. She crossed the room to the painting that hung behind the desk, a sweeping view of the Montana mountains where they had honeymooned. With practiced ease, she lifted it away, revealing the discreet safe built into the wall. The key slid into the lock, turning with a smooth click. Inside lay a single manila envelope. She hesitated only a moment before lifting it out, her heart pounding. She had opened it once before the day after the funeral, but grief had clouded her vision then. Tonight, however, the fog of mourning had lifted, replaced by resolve. She laid the envelope on the desk and slid the papers free. The partnership agreement was simple in its language, yet unshakable in its power. From the inception of Whitmore Enterprises, Richard and Eleanor had been equal partners, not merely in name but in legal authority. And there, written in precise ink, was the clause Richard had insisted upon. Upon the death of either partner, full control passed directly to the surviving spouse. Not to children, not to in-laws, to Eleanor alone. Daniel Prescott had no idea this paper existed. For years, she had let him believe he was in control. She had allowed him to sit in Richard's chair, to hang his degree on the wall where Richard's had once been. But she had never signed over her rights, not once. The phone's shrill ring shattered the quiet. Eleanor's breath caught when she saw Caroline's name flash across the screen. Mom, are you all right? Caroline's voice carried its usual blend of worry and apology. I'm fine, sweetheart. Eleanor tucked the document back into its envelope, her tone calm though her pulse raced. I'm so sorry about today, Caroline rushed on. Daniel was completely out of line. He shouldn't have spoken to you that way. It was always the same. Daniel behaved monstrously, and Caroline followed with apologies that excused nothing. He's stressed, Caroline continued, her voice soft. The board meeting next week has him on edge. There are rumors of a hostile takeover and… Caroline, Eleanor interrupted gently, does Daniel know that I own 51% of the company? A silence, long and disbelieving, stretched across the line. What are you talking about? Dad left everything to you but the company. Daniel said it was always the plan for him to take over. Eleanor closed her eyes, sorrow threading through her determination. Her own daughter hadn't known. Your father and I were partners from the very beginning. We decided early on that he would be the public face. The world wasn't ready to accept a woman at the helm in the ASDs. But make no mistake, we built that company together. Caroline faltered. But you never came to the office. You never sat in meetings. I don't understand. A quiet laugh slipped from Eleanor. Do you remember the nights your father came home with those thick binders of quarterly reports? Yes, Caroline whispered. He'd spread them across the dining table after we went to bed. And by morning, every page was covered in notes and corrections. Did you ever wonder who stayed awake all night reviewing those numbers? Silence. Then a breath of realization. Why didn't you ever say anything, Mom? Because it didn't matter who got the credit, Eleanor replied softly, turning the wedding band still warm on her finger. What mattered was that the work was done. Your father was brilliant with people, with vision. I was better with numbers, with strategy. Together we were unshakable. Caroline's voice trembled. Daniel will never believe this. He doesn't need to, Eleanor said firmly. The documents speak louder than he ever could. From Caroline's side came muffled voices, and then Daniel's sharp tone cut through. Is that your mother? Give me the phone. Eleanor's spine hottened, her resolve hardening. Caroline, tell Daniel I'll see him at the office tomorrow at 9 sharp. He can bring every lawyer he has, but it won't change a thing. Before her daughter could respond, Eleanor ended the call. The silence that followed filled the study like a tide. She walked to the window, her eyes falling on the garden Richard had loved. The Japanese maple he had gifted her on their 10th anniversary spread wide, its crimson leaves glowing in the moonlight. She remembered nights like this, when the business had nearly collapsed under rejection letters and closed doors. Richard had been ready to give up. They don't believe in us, he had said bitterly. Eleanor had taken the papers from his hands, recalculated the numbers, restructured the plan. Then we'll make them believe. We don't need their approval, Richard. We just need their signatures. The next morning, they had secured the loan that saved everything. They had always been partners. And now, 3 years after his death, it was her turn to prove it once again. Sleep evaded Eleanor that night. By dawn, she stood before her mirror, dressed in the navy suit she had worn to Richard's funeral, pearls at her ears, her silver hair pulled neatly into a chignon. She looked every bit the businesswoman Richard had always known her to be. They expect a grieving widow, she whispered to her reflection. Show them the leader instead. The conference room door swung open and every head turned. Eleanor Whitmore stepped inside, her heels striking the polished floor like a gavel. The room stilled, the hum of voices fading into a silence so sharp it felt alive. At the head of the table, Daniel Prescott's face drained of color before he forced a tight smile. He had been expecting a weary widow. What he got was something else entirely. Her navy suit fit like armor, the string of pearls at her throat gleaming in the light. She moved with the poise of a woman who belonged there because she always had. For the first time in years, Eleanor wasn't hiding behind shadows or silence. She had come to claim what was hers. Mrs. Whitmore, Samuel Brooks, the eldest board member, rose immediately, his warmth breaking through the tension. It's been far too long. One by one, other board members followed suit, greeting her with genuine affection. Diana Mitchell clasped her hands with a smile. Edward Callahan shook his head in disbelief at her presence, and murmurs rippled around the table. She's here. After all these years, she's finally here. Daniel remained seated, rigid in Richard's old chair, his knuckles white against the polished oak. We weren't expecting you until later, he said, his voice strained, his jaw tight. I'm an early riser, Eleanor replied calmly. Her gaze swept across the men and women who had built the company alongside her and Richard. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see familiar faces. A subtle smile tugged at the corner of her lips. Richard had always called it her chess player smile, the one she wore before making her decisive move. She set her handbag on the table and drew out the manila envelope. The sight of it made Daniel shift in his chair. We're in the middle of an important discussion, he snapped. Perhaps we can speak privately after. This concerns everyone, Eleanor interrupted, her voice steady, almost serene. And it directly relates to the restructuring you've been proposing. Murmurs stirred again, board members glancing at one another. Samuel leaned forward, his eyes curious. Perhaps you should join us, Eleanor. I believe your insight would be valuable. Absolutely not, Daniel interjected quickly, heat rising in his tone. Mrs. Whitmore is no longer involved in operations. This is a matter for active leadership only. Eleanor opened the envelope and laid out the documents. That is precisely what we are here to discuss. She handed copies around the table, saving Daniel's for last. These are the original partnership agreements between Richard and myself. As you will see, we were equal partners from the company's inception. And according to the succession clause, full control transfers to the surviving spouse. The room fell silent as the pages were scanned, the weight of her words sinking in. Daniel snatched his copy, his face reddening with each line his eyes devoured. This is absurd, he sputtered. This could be fabricated. Richard never. It's genuine, Samuel. Oh, it isn't genuine, Samuel said quietly, adjusting his glasses. I witnessed the signing myself. Richard was clear about his wishes. Daniel's head snapped toward him, fury flashing. You knew? All of you knew? Diana's voice cut through, sharp and steady. We assumed you did, Daniel, given your position. Position? He echoed bitterly. Interim CEO, Diana clarified, serving at Eleanor's discretion until she chose to step in or appoint another. The truth landed like a hammer. Daniel's facade cracked. He had never been more than a placeholder, and now everyone knew it. This is ridiculous, he hissed, slamming the paper down. I've been running this company for 3 years. You can't just walk in here and... Eleanor leaned forward, her calm like steel. And how has that been going, Daniel? Shall we review the last 12 quarters of declining growth? The 3 major clients we've lost? Or the offshore transfers that curiously began 2 months after Richard's death? A ripple of shock spread across the table. Diana's eyes narrowed. What transfers? The doors opened behind them, and Margaret Holloway stepped inside carrying another set of documents. She distributed them with quiet precision, her loyalty shining as bright as her courage. These records, Eleanor explained, detail financial transactions Daniel orchestrated, 3 separate transfers, just under reporting thresholds, all routed to a shell company in the Caymans. And if the timing seems familiar, it coincides perfectly with his purchase of a certain Aspen vacation home. Daniel's face blanched. This is slander. You've manufactured... A new voice cut him off. No, Daniel, it's the truth. Every head turned as Harold Denton, the retired CFO, stepped into the room, dignified in his tailored suit. I reviewed those transfers myself when Eleanor asked for my help 3 months ago. Based on our performance history, our stock should be nearly double its current value. Instead, we've been hemorrhaging clients. The board deserves to know why. Daniel's eyes widened in horror. You've been planning this, he accused Eleanor. I've been watching you dismantle Richard's legacy, she corrected evenly. The planning began when I discovered you were stealing from us. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the sound of papers shuffling as the board members read the damning evidence. Diana leaned back, her voice cold with betrayal. You were negotiating with Maxwell Holdings, weren't you? They're known for gutting companies and discarding employees. Were you prepared to sell us out? Daniel's composure finally cracked. His voice rose, desperate, defiant. You don't understand. We needed to adapt or die. Maxwell has resources we can't match. To destroy everything Richard built. Eleanor cut in, her voice steady, unwavering. To line your own pockets while hundreds of employees lost their livelihoods. Don't insult us by calling it adaptation. Call it what it is, greed. Daniel's breath came fast, anger surging as he searched for support. But all around the table, eyes met his with cold certainty. Eleanor straightened, her voice carrying the weight of finality. This company does not belong to you, Daniel. It never has. And today, it ends. The boardroom crackled with the force of truth revealed. The boardroom lingered in stunned silence after Eleanor's declaration. Papers lay scattered across the oak table, the ink on those damning documents as permanent as the truth they carried. Daniel Prescott's jaw worked furiously, his face mottled with rage. For years he had strutted through these halls as though he owned them. Now the ground had shifted beneath him, and he was scrambling for footing. This is a witch hunt, he spat, his voice trembling with a blend of fury and fear. You're all willing to throw me aside because of her? A woman who hasn't set foot in this office in years? Eleanor remained calm, her posture regal, her eyes unwavering. I didn't abandon this company, Daniel. I built it. I bled for it. I simply chose to let Richard be the face while I managed the strategy. You mistook my silence for weakness. She leaned forward, her voice low but sharp enough to cut steel. And that was your greatest mistake. Harold Denton adjusted his cufflinks, his presence commanding. The evidence is clear. Offshore accounts, financial discrepancies, declining client trust. You've jeopardized everything Whitmore Enterprises stands for. Samuel Brooks rose from his chair, steady despite his age. I've known this company since its infancy. I watched Richard and Eleanor pour their lives into it. I will not stand by while you dismantle their legacy. Eleanor, my vote is with you. Diana Mitchell followed, her expression resolute. Mine as well. Eleanor, you have my full support. It's time this company was led by the person who has always held its foundation together. Edward Callahan, loyal and steady, added his voice. You've proven your strength, Mrs. Whitmore. Consider me at your side. The swell of support surged like a tide, leaving Daniel stranded. His shoulders slumped, yet his mouth refused to still. You can't just remove me. Executive terminations require board approval. Samuel tapped the agreement with a deliberate finger. Not when the majority shareholder holds unilateral authority. The contract is explicit. Daniel's face drained of color. You can't do this to me, he muttered, desperation creeping into his tone. Eleanor's voice softened. but her words carried finality. I already have. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your position. Security will escort you from the building. For a moment, it seemed he might lunge across the table, but then the fight bled out of him, replaced with a look of venomous hatred. You'll regret this, he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. Eleanor didn't flinch. The only thing I regret, she replied evenly, is not doing it sooner. Two uniformed security officers entered the room at Margaret's quiet signal. Daniel's protests rang hollow as they guided him out, his footsteps echoing down the hall like the fading roar of a toppled tyrant. The board exhaled in unison, the tension snapping like a taut wire finally cut. All eyes turned to Eleanor. Some were filled with relief, others with awe, all with respect. What now? Dinah asked, breaking the silence. We've exposed him, but the company is vulnerable. Maxwell Holdings won't back down easily. We need direction. Eleanor straightened, the mantle of leadership settling over her shoulders with natural grace. First, stability. Our employees need reassurance. Our clients need confidence. Harold will return as interim CFO until we secure a permanent replacement. Edward, continue managing operations. Diana, I want you leading a client retention task force. Every relationship Daniel neglected, every bridge he burned, we rebuild them, starting today. Heads nodded around the table, pens scratching as Margaret recorded each directive with her usual precision. And Maxwell? Samuel pressed gently. Eleanor's expression hardened. They will not take this company. Not now, not ever. We will expose every ounce of fraud Daniel attempted, and in doing so strip Maxwell of their leverage. They thrive on weakness. Let's show them strength. A quiet murmur of agreement swept the room. The energy shifted, no longer fearful but galvanized. When the meeting adjourned, Eleanor remained behind in what had once been Richard's office. The air still smelled faintly of his cologne, though Daniel's sleek, impersonal furniture had stripped away much of the warmth. She ran her hand across the cold glass of the desk and shook her head. This will all have to go, she said softly. Margaret, who had lingered by the door, nodded. I've already called Marcus Delaney, the designer who helped with the conference rooms. He's available next week. Eleanor smiled, the first genuine smile she'd felt in days. What would I do without you, Margaret? Let's hope you never have to find out, Margaret replied, setting a fresh stack of files before her. Client contracts, staffing issues, and the Newton account. They're wavering since Daniel's last disastrous meeting. Eleanor picked up the top file, flipping through its pages with practiced ease. Schedule a lunch with Jackson Newton. I'll speak with him personally. He deserves to hear our vision from me, not from Daniel's reckless mouth. Margaret scribbled a note, efficient as ever. And the Labor Day dinner you were planning? She asked after a pause. Do you want me to cancel it? Eleanor considered. That dinner had once been meant to smooth things with Daniel, to mend the fracture in her family. But now that bridge lay in ashes. No, she said finally, her eyes firm. Don't cancel it. Change it. Invite our senior staff and their families. Let them see the heart of this company still beats strong, and invite Caroline. Tell her it's time to come home. Margaret's eyes softened. Yes, Eleanor. As the late afternoon sun slanted through the wide office windows, Eleanor leaned back in Richard's chair. Her chair now. The weight of leadership pressed down, but instead of fear, she felt a steady pulse of strength. For the first time since his death, she wasn't just surviving. She was leading. And Richard's legacy, their legacy, was back where it belonged, in her hands. The call came early on a Monday morning, shattering the calm of Eleanor Whitmore's office. Margaret stepped in, her expression tight. Mrs. Whitmore, it's Mr. Prescott. He says it's urgent. Eleanor's hand paused on the pen she had been using to sign contracts. She hadn't spoken to Daniel since security had escorted him out of the building. Her pulse quickened, but her voice remained even. Put him through. The line clicked, and Daniel's voice bled through, raw and slurred. You think you've won, don't you? Eleanor's stomach turned. His words carried the weight of whiskey, despite the early hour. Where are you, Daniel? A low, bitter laugh answered. Where do you think? I'm sitting in your precious house, the one you refuse to sell, the one you're so sentimental about. A chill gripped her spine. Is Caroline with you? Caroline? He spat the name. She's gone. Packed a bag, left a note, ran off to her friend's place. Didn't even bother to say it to my face, so much for loyalty. His tone twisted into mockery. Looks like she chose you after all. Relief surged through Eleanor at the thought that her daughter was safe. But that relief was short-lived. "Daniel, you need to leave my house," she said firmly. "You don't live there anymore." "Don't I?" His sneer was audible. "Last I checked, I'm still married to Carolyn. That makes me family. Isn't that what you always preached? Family first. Family doesn't steal. Family doesn't lie. Family doesn't try to throw each other out into the street." For a moment, silence stretched thin across the line. Then his voice returned, sharp and desperate. "I want a deal. Reinstate me as CEO. Give me control of the European division like Richard promised me years ago. Do that, and I'll forget everything that happened. We'll go back to the way things were." Eleanor almost laughed at his audacity. "The way things were? You mean with you siphoning money into offshore accounts? With you plotting to sell Whitmore Enterprises to Maxwell Holdings? With you treating me like hired help in my own home? That's your idea of a deal?" "I have information," he pressed, his voice rising. "Things about the company you don't know. Arrangements Richard made that were never put in writing. Secrets he never shared with you. You're bluffing, and even if you weren't, I don't care. There's nothing you could say that would make me trust you again." A dangerous edge crept into his tone. "Fine, then maybe I'll just find another way to make you understand. You'd be surprised how quickly a house can fall apart when nobody's taking care of it." Her blood turned cold. "What have you done, Daniel?" "Nothing yet, but I've got all day. Maybe I'll start with Richard's study. All those books, all those photographs. Would be a shame if something happened to them." Eleanor shot a look at Margaret, who had frozen in the doorway. Covering the receiver with her hand, she whispered, "Call security, now." She forced her voice steady as she returned to the line. "Daniel, listen to me carefully. If you damage anything in that house, I will press charges. Breaking and entering. Destruction of property. You'll end up in jail." "You wouldn't dare," he scoffed. "Think of the scandal. Think of what it would do to Caroline. Caroline already knows what kind of man you are. There's nothing left for me to protect." His breathing grew heavier, angrier. "You've always underestimated me. You think you're so clever with your secret documents and loyal board members, but I'm always one step ahead. Is that why you're drunk at 10 in the morning? Breaking into my house and making threats? Because you're ahead?" Her words struck their mark. His voice cracked, rage seeping through. "You think you can humiliate me and get away with it? You think you can take everything from me? No, Eleanor, this is your fault. Everything was fine until you interfered. Richard knew his place. He understood business. You're just a bitter old woman trying to play queen." A crash thundered in the background, glass shattering. Eleanor's heart seized as images of Richard's collection of antique decanters and family photographs flooded her mind. "Daniel, stop this now," she commanded. "Security is already on their way." He laughed, the sound jagged and wild. "By the time they get here, I'll be done, and don't think this ends today. Maxwell is still interested in the company. They were planning a hostile takeover with or without me. You won't be able to stop it." Another crash echoed down the line. Eleanor's grip tightened on the phone, her voice calm even as fear clawed at her chest. "You're making a mistake, Daniel. No, your mistake was thinking you could win against me. I'll destroy everything you care about, starting with this house." In the distance, sirens wailed, growing louder by the second. Shouts rang through the receiver, pounding on the front door, orders barked. Daniel's voice dropped to a hiss. "This isn't over." "For you it is," Eleanor said, and she ended the call. Her hands trembled as she lowered the phone. Margaret rushed back in moments later, her face pale. Security caught him. He broke several windows, smashed some furniture, but they stopped him before he reached Richard's study. The police are taking him into custody now. Breaking and entering, vandalism, threats, it's all on record. Eleanor closed her eyes, relief and grief warring inside her. This man had once sat at her family's table, held her grandchildren in his arms. Now he was nothing but a storm tearing through their lives. The phone rang again. Caroline's name glowed across the screen. Eleanor braced herself and answered. "Mom." Caroline's voice was raw, shaking. "Is it true they arrested Daniel?" "I'm afraid so, sweetheart. He broke into the house. He was threatening to destroy Richard's study." A sob cracked through the line. "I should have seen it. I should have stopped him." "None of this is your fault," Eleanor said softly. "Daniel made his choices. Now we pick up the pieces, together." If you're standing with Eleanor in this fight, don't go anywhere. Hit that follow, share her story, and stay close, because the storm is only beginning. The air inside the boardroom was heavy with urgency when Eleanor Whitmore called the emergency meeting. Only days had passed since Daniel's drunken rampage at her home, but already the whispers of Maxwell Holdings' hostile intentions had grown louder. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, Richard's chair, now hers, her presence commanding, her expression carved from steel. Around her, Samuel Brooks, Diana Mitchell, Edward Callahan, Harold Denton, and Margaret Holloway waited for her to speak. She opened the folder in front of her, the crisp sound of paper breaking the silence. Daniel's outburst wasn't just the behavior of a desperate man, she began. He confirmed what we already suspected. Maxwell is moving forward with plans for a takeover. We can't afford to react. We must strike first. Edward leaned forward, his brow furrowed. He's done more damage than we thought. The clients he neglected, the projects he sabotaged. He made it look as though selling was the only way forward. Then we prove him wrong, Eleanor said, her tone steady. We show our employees, our clients, and the market that Whitmore Enterprises is stronger than it's ever been. The foundation Richard and I built cannot be toppled by greed. Harold adjusted his glasses, his silver hair catching the light. The forensic audit is nearly complete. Once it's made public, Maxwell will lose ground. No investor will back a takeover tainted by fraud. Diana nodded. But until then, perception is everything. We need to project confidence. Clients must see stability, not chaos. Margaret slid a list of names across the table. We've begun outreach to key partners. Jackson Newton has agreed to a private meeting with Eleanor later this week. If we can secure the Newton account, others will follow. Eleanor allowed herself a faint smile. I'll meet him myself. It's time our partners see the woman behind the name. They've seen enough of Daniel's arrogance. The strategy session carried them deep into the night, each plan layered upon the next. Client retention, employee morale, restructuring, neglected projects. By the end, the path forward was clear. Difficult, but clear. When the meeting adjourned, Samuel lingered behind. He studied Eleanor with a warmth that softened the edges of his age. Richard would be proud, he said quietly. Eleanor's throat tightened, but she forced a steady breath. He always believed timing was everything. I suppose he was right. You were the strength all along, Samuel replied. Now the world knows it. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor's life blurred into long days and longer nights. She moved between boardrooms, client lunches, and late strategy sessions, her energy fueled by resolve. Harold returned as interim CFO, guiding the financial team with the calm authority of a man who had nothing left to prove. Edward kept operations steady, ensuring the company's core remained unshaken. Diana rallied the client task force, turning doubt into loyalty, one conversation at a time. Eleanor's presence at the center of it all was undeniable. She answered every question, faced every challenge, and with each victory, the shadow Daniel had cast over the company receded further. Yet at home, the cost of his betrayal lingered. Carolyn filed for divorce, her voice trembling, but resolute when she told Eleanor, I can't keep pretending, Mom. He's destroyed too much. Eleanor reached across the table, taking her daughter's hand. You're stronger than you know, Caroline. You don't have to carry his sins. Tears welled in Caroline's eyes. But for the first time in years, Eleanor saw a spark of freedom there. A glimpse of the daughter she had raised to be brave. The grandchildren came to visit more often now, their laughter filling the house that had once echoed with silence. Sophie curled into the window seat with her books, and Lucas explored Richard's old telescope, his eyes alight with wonder. These small moments stitched Eleanor's fractured heart, proof that even in the wreckage, life rebuilt itself. But Maxwell Holdings did not relent. Rumors swirled of backroom deals and aggressive buyouts. Their executives circled like vultures, certain the weakened company would soon collapse. At one tense board meeting, Diana placed a stack of reports on the table. They've begun targeting our staff, offering higher salaries, promising security we supposedly can't match. If we lose more talent, we'll bleed out before we can recover. Eleanor scanned the reports, her jaw tight. Then we make Whitmore a place no one wants to leave. We rebuild not only with money but with trust. Richard always said this company was a family. It's time we remind them of that. Edward leaned back, a spark of admiration in his eyes. You're not just saving a business, Eleanor. You're restoring its soul. She met his gaze, her voice steady. This company isn't just numbers on a page. It's every late night Richard and I spent building it. It's every employee who believed in us when no one else would. I will not let Maxwell turn it into ashes." Her words ignited something in the room. Determination replaced doubt, resolve steadied hands. For the first time since Richard's death, Whitmore Enterprises pulsed with the same energy that had carried it from a dream in a dining room to a force in the marketplace. Outside those walls, storms still gathered. But within them, Eleanor had forged a shield of loyalty and truth. Maxwell might attack, but they would find her ready. And as she stood at her office window that night, watching the city glow beneath her, Eleanor whispered to the memory of her husband, "We're still building, Richard, and I will not let it fall." 6 months later, the house that had once echoed with loneliness was alive again. The Labor Day that had nearly broken Eleanor Whitmore now marked a different kind of anniversary, the day she reclaimed everything that mattered. Outside, the late summer sun poured over the garden, where new roses climbed in vivid colors. Their blooms stood as a testament to resilience, hardy varieties Eleanor had planted herself. Roses that thrived in harsher conditions but returned stronger each year. Caroline arrived first, her arms full of flowers and her smile hesitant, but brighter than Eleanor had seen in years. Divorce papers were nearly finalized, and Daniel's shadow no longer trailed her every step. She looked lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "The roses look beautiful, Mom," Carolyn murmured as they walked through the garden together. "I don't remember them ever being this vibrant." Eleanor brushed her hand across the petals, her voice warm. "They're new, they take more work, but they endure. They remind me of us." Caroline's eyes glistened, understanding the unspoken truth. Soon, Sophie and Lucas bounded in, carrying bouquets of wildflowers they had picked from the meadow behind the house. At 12 and 14, they were still adjusting to the rupture of their parents' marriage, but today their laughter rang clear and unburdened. "Grandma," Sophie said breathlessly, "can I stay in the room with the window seat next weekend?" Eleanor's heart swelled. "Of course, sweetheart. That room has been waiting for you." Lucas grinned, his excitement sparking. "And can I use Grandpa's telescope? Dad never let me, but I've started astronomy at school. I want to see what he saw." "Richard's telescope." Eleanor felt her throat tighten, but she nodded with a smile. "It's yours, Lucas. Your grandfather would have loved that. His notebooks are still in the study. You'll find pages filled with his observations." Lucas's eyes widened. "Really, that's amazing." The house filled quickly after that. Edward Callahan and his wife arrived. Harold Denton and his partner, James, followed. Margaret brought her daughter, Sophia, and Samuel Brooks entered with Diana Mitchell at his side. One by one, the rooms that had felt cavernous in silence swelled with warmth, with laughter, with the pulse of belonging. The dining table, once a stage for Eleanor's humiliation, now gleamed with light and joy. Dishes passed from hand to hand, glasses raised in gratitude, the air alive with conversation. Eleanor stood at the head, her gaze sweeping across the faces of those who had walked with her through fire. Before anyone could lift a fork, she raised her glass. "I want to thank you," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "When Richard died, I thought the heart of this company died with him. I withdrew, I let others take control, and because of that, I nearly lost everything we built together. But each of you reminded me of something he used to say." She paused, her eyes finding Caroline, who mouthed the words in tandem. "A house is only as strong as its foundation." Eleanor smiled. "This company, this family, this home, they are all built on foundations Richard and I laid together. And though the walls may crack, though the structure may need repair, the foundation endures. Strong, unshaken. Today, we rise again on that foundation." Glasses lifted around the table. "To foundations," voices echoed, firm and resolute. Dinner unfolded with ease, the kind Eleanor had longed for. Margaret teased Edward about his tendency to overanalyze every contract. Harold shared stories of his supposed quiet retirement, interrupted by Eleanor's determined phone call, and laughter bubbled in every corner. Later, Carolyn found her mother in the kitchen, preparing coffee as she had done countless times before. Her voice was tentative, but filled with something Eleanor hadn't heard in years. Hope. "Mom, I've been meaning to ask. The townhouse I'm renting, it's fine for now, but with the settlement dragging on, I don't know when I'll be able to afford something better for the kids and me." She hesitated. "Would you consider letting us move back here? Just until I get back on my feet?" Eleanor turned from the coffee pot, her answer immediate. "Carolyn, this has always been your home. You and the children are welcome for as long as you need. Caroline's relief came like a satisfy breaking free. Really? You wouldn't mind the noise, the chaos? Eleanor laughed, the sound light and genuine. After 3 years of silence, I would welcome it. Caroline crossed the room in an instant, throwing her arms around her mother. It was the first spontaneous embrace in years. Thank you for everything, for not giving up on me, for not giving up on us. Eleanor held her close, her eyes stinging with tears she didn't try to stop. That's what family does. We believe in each other, even when no one else will. In that moment, as the hum of voices and the clink of glasses drifted in from the dining room, Eleanor knew they were no longer rebuilding from ruins. They were building forward, laying stones on a foundation that would carry them into a future Richard would have been proud of. And if Eleanor's victory has touched you, if her strength has reminded you of your own, share this story, let it spread, and keep following. Because what she reclaimed wasn't just a company, but a life reborn. When the last of the coffee cups were rinsed and the guests' laughter faded into the evening air, the house settled into a quieter rhythm. The children sprawled on the living room rug, Sophie braiding wildflowers into small crowns, while Lucas pored over Richard's old astronomy notebooks, his eyes wide at the neat rows of calculations. Eleanor watched them from the doorway, her heart swelling with a quiet joy she hadn't felt in years. Caroline joined her, leaning against the frame, her voice hushed as though afraid to disturb the peace. They look happy, don't they? Eleanor nodded, happier than they've been in a long time. Caroline exhaled, her shoulders dropping, as if releasing a burden. I never realized how much tension they carried. Daniel. He controlled the air in every room. The silence was never comfortable. It was suffocating. Eleanor turned, studying her daughter's face. There were lines of strain there, but also a strength that hadn't been present before. You've carried a heavy weight, Caroline, when it wasn't yours to bear. I let him get away with too much, Caroline admitted, guilt flickering across her features. He twisted everything, made me believe it was normal. I should have protected the kids. I should have protected you. Eleanor reached for her hand, squeezing gently. You were surviving. Sometimes survival means enduring until the moment you can stand again. You've stood now. That's what matters. Tears welled in Caroline's eyes, but she didn't look away. You've always been stronger than I gave you credit for. Daniel made me think you were fragile, someone to be pitied. I see now how wrong I was. You were holding everything together, even when no one noticed. Eleanor's smile was soft but steady. Strength doesn't always shout, Caroline. Sometimes it waits, patient until it's needed. They moved into the kitchen, where the last of the candles flickered, shadows dancing across the polished counters. Caroline busied herself gathering plates, but her voice trembled with vulnerability. The townhouse is so quiet at night. The kids hate it. They miss this house, the comfort of it. When I asked if we could stay here, I was afraid you'd say no. This place is as much theirs as it is mine, Eleanor said, her tone firm. I want them to grow up knowing it's their refuge, and I want you to know it's yours too. Caroline turned, her eyes shimmering. Thank you, Mom, for not giving up on me, even when I let him push you aside. You're my daughter, Eleanor replied simply. Richard and I built this house with love. That love didn't end when he passed, and it won't end because of Daniel. You and the children are part of that foundation. Caroline's tears spilled freely then, and she wrapped her arms around her mother in a fierce embrace. For a long moment, they stood together in the dim kitchen, two women bound by blood, grief, and a renewed strength neither had realized they possessed. Later, after Caroline had gathered the children and promised to return with overnight bags, Eleanor found herself alone in Richard's study. The room smelled faintly of leather and cedar, with a whisper of his cologne lingering in the air. She traced her hand over the desk, now mirrored by another one placed beside it. Her desk. Two desks, side by side, just as their lives had always been. On the wall hung a new photograph, framed and centered. It was taken on their 30th anniversary, a candid shot of Eleanor and Richard dancing beneath the stars in the garden, their faces turned toward each other in laughter. The joy in their eyes was so complete, so unguarded, that it almost hurt to look at. Eleanor sank into her chair, the leather sighing beneath her, and allowed herself to breathe deeply. For months she had fought battles in boardrooms and, in her own home, her every step shadowed by Daniel's malice. Now, at last, there was calm. She opened one of Richard's notebooks, the familiar script curling across the yellowed pages. Margins were filled with calculations, small notes he had left for himself, arrows pointing toward ideas he never finished. She smiled, running her finger along the words. "You never stopped planning, Richard," she whispered, "and neither will I." Her eyes lifted to the telescope near the window, now destined for Lucas's eager hands. She imagined her grandson peering through the lens, marveling at constellations Richard had charted decades before. The thought warmed her chest. Richard's legacy would not just live in boardrooms and contracts, it would live in the curiosity of his grandson, in the laughter of his granddaughter, in the resilience of his daughter, and in Eleanor herself. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed softly, marking the hour. She leaned back, closing her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. For the first time since Richard's death, the silence of the house didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like peace. Soon the halls would echo with Sophie's chatter, with Lucas's discoveries, with Caroline's renewed laughter. Soon the house would be alive in ways Daniel had tried to suffocate. And in that life, Eleanor would find not just the strength to lead a company, but the strength to lead her family into a future rebuilt on truth. The night was quiet, but Eleanor felt Richard's presence as clearly as if he were beside her. She whispered to the still air, her voice steady, filled with love and defiance. "We did it, Richard. We saved it all." The house was quiet again after Caroline and the children left to gather their things, but it was not the hollow quiet Eleanor Whitmore had endured for years. This silence felt full, alive with echoes of laughter still lingering in the air, with footsteps that promised to return. The walls, once witnesses to her humiliation and despair, now held a new kind of memory: triumph. Eleanor lingered in Richard's study, her hands resting lightly on the polished edge of her desk, placed now beside his. The two desks mirrored each other perfectly, like two lives forever intertwined. She reached for the photograph on the wall, her and Richard on their 30th anniversary, caught mid-dance beneath the garden lights, faces turned toward each other in unguarded joy. She smiled at the image, her heart swelling with a mix of longing and peace. She lowered herself into Richard's chair and let her fingers drift across the familiar grooves worn into the leather. She could almost hear his voice, low and steady, reminding her of the truths he had always known. "You were never just my wife, Eleanor. You were my partner, my equal. The reason this company stood when the world doubted us." Her gaze fell to the pile of files Margaret had left earlier. Client updates, strategic proposals, the ongoing audit reports. The work ahead was daunting, but Eleanor felt no fear. The storm had passed. What remained was rebuilding, not from ruin, but from strength. Richard's legacy had not been lost. It had been defended, reclaimed, and renewed. From the living room came the faint scent of roses drifting through the open window. She thought of Caroline's smile, freer now than it had been in years, of Sophie curled in the window seat, of Lucas's wide-eyed wonder at the telescope. They were the new foundation, the future Richard had always dreamed of, and the one Eleanor would now protect with everything she had. The grandfather clock chimed softly, marking the hour. Eleanor rose, moving to the window where the night stretched wide, stars glinting in patterns Richard had charted long ago. She rested her hand against the glass and whispered into the stillness. "We did it, Richard. We saved it all. And now we'll build something even stronger." Her reflection in the glass was no longer just that of a widow, no longer just a mother. She saw herself clearly for the first time. Eleanor Whitmore, leader, builder, survivor. A woman who had weathered betrayal, humiliation, and loss, and had risen not only to reclaim her power, but to create a future where her family and her company could thrive. As she closed the study door behind her, the past settled gently into its place. No longer a weight, but a foundation. Ahead stretched the future, unexpected, uncharted, but hers to command. And if Eleanor's journey has moved you, if her strength has reminded you that it's never too late to rise, then share her story, let others hear it, and carry her legacy forward. Because courage, like foundations, endures.